Hi, this is Captain Video. A few weeks ago, Vox's YouTube channel made a video arguing that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is overrated, and I'm here to tell you, at least in my opinion, that they were wrong about that. Let's talk about it.
Not a great plan.
Let me start by saying I'm not the first YouTuber to respond to Vox's video. In fact, Captain Midnight, one of my favorite YouTube channels, already made a great video talking about many of the things that this Vox video got wrong. I'll put a link to that video in the description, as well as the original Vox video. In case you missed it, in October of 2018, Vox's YouTube channel, as a part of their series Overrated, made a long video discussing why Vox's Phil Edwards thinks the MCU is overrated. Only that's not really what the video is about. It mostly discusses a history of fictional universes, settling in on the Tommy Westphall universe theory. The idea behind that theory is that on the 80s television show St. Elsewhere, the entire show may have taken place inside a snow-globed world imagined by a minor character named Tommy Westphall. The Vox video goes into great detail about this theory, arguing that every show that had a crossover with St. Elsewhere, like MASH, or Degrassi Junior High, or Cheers, must have happened inside that snow globe too. It goes on further to say that shows that have then crossed over with those crossover shows, like Frasier or The X-Files, must have also happened within the same universe. Ironically, Phil Edwards in that same Vox video even says,
"It spans from 1952 to today." It's a dumb theory, but it's meant to be.
But he says it illustrates the problems with the MCU. And it doesn't. It just doesn't. He says the crossovers in the MCU, where we have cameos or even discussions of other characters, is continuity clutter, and he calls them, quote, exposition dumps. One of his main arguments is that
Ant-Man required a weak excuse right in the middle of the movie.
I think our first move should be calling the Avengers.
And for that, I would simply have to disagree. I mean, if these characters really exist in the same world, shouldn't they all be talking about each other? I mean, to counter his Ant-Man argument, after the whole world knows that the Avengers saved not just New York, but the entire planet, if you were in a panic, wouldn't you say, hey, how about we just call the Avengers? I mean, if anything, if we want to take the world building, like Vox says we should, seriously, it's hard to imagine that that sort of thing doesn't happen more often in these MCU movies. So it's natural that that happened in Ant-Man. Rewatch Iron Man 3, for example, and realize someone should have suggested that Tony at least call one of the Avengers for help, even if it's just Hawkeye. He probably wasn't busy. And that's the appeal, in part, of the MCU, and of Marvel Comics in general. You see, in the earliest days of Stan Lee's first issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, and the Avengers, one of the biggest appeals for readers is that they were all in the same universe, but also, often, all in the same city, New York. And that because of that, they would interact all the time and refer to each other's adventures along the way, and not just in a very special issue. It would be commonplace. Like Bradford Wright says in his book Comic Book Nation, quote, central to Lee's editorial strategy was his evolving concept of the Marvel Universe. The Marvel comic books all fit together as a collective narrative. Lee endeavored to weave his characters and plot references into a coherent modern mythology that invited an unusual degree of reader involvement, end quote. And, not surprisingly, Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios have tried to emulate that in the MCU films over the past decade, because that's what the devoted fan base had come to love and expect from the comics. In the Vox video, Edward says,
"These crossovers are always about juicing ratings, not telling a good story."
And again, I'd respectfully disagree with that. Maybe you think crossover appeal and meaningful storytelling are mutually exclusive, that you can have one, but not the other. But I think both are easily possible. While there are certain MCU films that seem to have lots of pressure to also set up possible sequels as a part of the storyline, Avengers Age of Ultron in particular comes to mind, that doesn't automatically make a B story or a cameo or an after credit scene heavy-handed. If you will, try to recall watching 2008's Iron Man for the first time and seeing Nick Fury show up at the end after the credits to say,
"Think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet."
When you realized that he was there to pitch the Avengers Initiative to Tony Stark, did you say, as an audience member, "Oh no, not this heavy-handed
universe exposition dump"?
Or were you excited? My guess is that you were happy to see that we could be building toward an Avengers movie. Vox's Phil Edwards is quick to argue that merchandise and Easter eggs are as deep as this universe goes. And while there are plenty of both in the MCU, I see his point. I'm confused that he keeps arguing,
"But it's not a transformed universe."
And though I've watched that Vox video a few times, I'm still not certain what he means exactly by a transformed universe. But my best guess is what he means by a transformed universe is that he wants a coherent, intertwined world where we see how events from the films affect the average person. His main argument for a richer universe is
one in which the lives of all people are transformed by a shared history.
Then, of all things, he cites the 1980s comic series Damage Control as what he'd like to see from the MCU, a storyline that deals with the consequences of superhero life on the world at large. I'd agree with Vox's point that the Netflix series, owned by Marvel, with their more grounded, street-level heroes and longer runtimes, had the opportunity to deal with this, and they totally passed on it, when maybe they shouldn't have. However, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think we want an MCU movie that follows the frustrated maintenance crews that sweep the streets after the Battle of New York. And while it didn't play out as the most serious battle, that's what Captain America Civil War's central conflict was all about, is that there have to be consequences to the actions of these heroes, even if they save the world in the process.
New York. Washington, D.C. Sokovia. Okay, that's enough. Captain, people are afraid.
That's why I'm here. We need to be put in check.
The Vox video goes on to praise Fox's X-Men films as a better, transformed cinematic universe. He says,
"Every character, human and mutant, has taken sides in a generations-long battle, with real stakes, unlike Marvel's Civil War. That leads to creative possibilities, like decade jumping and even tonal experimentation."
Don't get me wrong, I like some of those X-Men films, most of them actually, but except for Logan and Deadpool, there's not really any tonal experimentation along the way. Those are the exceptions, not the rules. You know, I think it's easy to forget what Marvel has accomplished with the MCU. As I'm sure you may know by now, in the mid-90s, when Marvel filed for bankruptcy, they sold away the film rights to what were considered, at least at that time, some of their most popular characters, including Spider-Man, Venom, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, which included, of course, both Wolverine and Deadpool. So when they launched their own cinematic universe in 2008 with Iron Man, they were doing it with unfamiliar characters that were considered, with rare exception, to be less than household names. And so it's incredible today to flash forward 10 years later and the average person that doesn't read comics could recognize Black Panther, Groot, Loki, and Bucky Barnes much quicker than he could identify Beast or the Human Torch, and that speaks to the impact the MCU has had. While the Vox video goes on a weird yet quick what if Aquaman was in the Avengers tangent,
My man!
the MCU has led to many other movie studios attempting their own cinematic universes, and they've almost all failed. It turns out making an interconnected series of films with their own characters and themes taking place in the same universe is hard. Ask Universal Studios about their Dark Universe, which Tom Cruise couldn't even save. Ask Sony about their amazing Spider-Man universe they were building to with all those Sinister Six Easter eggs in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And ask Warner Brothers how their initial run at the DCEU worked out for them between Man of Steel and Justice League. Also, while there isn't a jump in tonal experimentation on the level of the jump from 2016's X-Men Apocalypse to 2017's Logan within the MCU, it's incredible that all the MCU movies managed to remain, quote, fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. With most releases, not all of them, but most of them, Marvel Studios is able to place their films in the hands of talented directors, and just when we think the Marvel movies might be played out, they put a new spin on things. Captain America Winter Soldier is very much inspired by 70s era espionage thrillers, while Ant-Man manages to be a comedic, fantastical take on a heist movie. And I could go on and on, like the psychedelic trippy direction of Doctor Strange, or the colorful irreverent Guardians of the Galaxy films, or how director Taika Waititi went all in on the comedy for Thor Ragnarok, breathing new life and depth into the God of Thunder.
We're the same, you and I. Just a couple of hot-headed fools.
Yeah, same. Hulk like fire, Thor like water.
Well, kind of both like fire.
But Hulk like raging fire, Thor like smoldering fire.
Ultimately, the MCU films aren't ever going to win an Oscar for Best Picture, but that doesn't make them overrated. You're not going to confuse another Ant-Man sequel with Citizen Kane or The Godfather or Birdman. Nor should you. But when so many blockbusters fail, I think it's remarkable that the MCU films continue to succeed, both critically and commercially. While they might not be as artistically significant or risky as what Fox did with Logan, there's also an important investment factor to think about when it comes to audiences. When Thanos snaps his fingers at the end of Avengers Infinity War, there's a reason why my entire theater sat there on opening night when the credits rolled in complete silence. You know, when people usually begin chatting, grabbing their empty bag of popcorn, and walking out of the theater, there was a real surprise there that no matter how temporary in terms of the franchise's storyline, it's surprising that the MCU decided to not only kill off many of their most popular characters, but to end a movie by doing so. Peter Parker might not have felt so good, but as audiences watching that movie for the first time, we did neither, because we were sad about the ending.
You're alright.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Sorry.
And that's because, through 10 years of moviegoing, we've grown attached to these characters and have developed, at least in some small way, an emotional connection to them. Like David Betancourt, writing for the Washington Post, said in his review of Avengers Infinity War, quote, Thanos packs a heck of a punch in Infinity War. He pretty much punches everyone. It's the emotion behind those punches that will surprise you. The Vox video essay ends by saying,
The MCU is just a business strategy. The universe is still in development.
And while most third graders could probably tell you that the Avengers are owned by a large company, Disney, a property's ownership, no matter how big or small, doesn't make it overrated or underrated. I know I like these films, as a whole, more than the average person, but to equate them as being no better than a boy staring at a snow globe, or no more thought out than Mork from Mork and Mindy meeting Fonzie from Happy Days, is just silly. The Vox video seems upset that it's hard to imagine being the average Joe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe if it was a real world that we lived in. And quite honestly, I think that's part of the appeal. Because when you see that shot from the Infinity War trailer, you know, the one that wasn't actually even in the movie, I don't think you wonder, I wonder what a college student or a cashier or a janitor is doing right now in that same moment. In conclusion, when you watch these movies and you see scenes like that, you imagine yourself as Captain America or Okoye or Black Panther or the Hulk. you imagine yourself as the hero. After all, I believe we go to these movies for their connected universe, sure, but also because we get to see the best of humanity embodied by these characters. Regardless of their powers, or gender, or skin color, we admire their heroism, determination, strength, sense of humor, and their ability to do the impossible against all odds. And no matter what a video essay may tell you, there's nothing overrated about that.
He did it.